On June 12, 2023, a sudden swell turned Jeffreys Bay in South Africa into a battlefield, thrusting 295 surfers into chaos. Without any heads-up, the sea surged up like a wall, swallowing the shore with a deafening roar. Just minutes later, a rogue wave crashed into a chartered surf boat full of eager riders, flipping it over as if it were a child's toy. Dozens of riders got caught in tangled ropes, their boards bobbing helplessly like driftwood. From the chaos's edge, the organizer barked, "We green-lighted this wave," while emergency crews dove in, sirens wailing over the pounding surf. A trembling surfer, eyes wide in disbelief, managed to gasp, "This is hell on the shore." Those words sliced the wind, hinting at a deeper systemic failure that would soon explode in courtrooms and headlines. Usually a playground for the world's elite, the beach turned into a crucible of panic. Lifeguards waded through the surf, hauling victims out as onlookers scrambled for safety, their cries echoing above the sea's roar. When the tide finally fell back, it exposed twisted ropes, shattered boards, and a stunned crowd. A heavy question lingered. How could any organizer claim responsibility for a wave that turned a famed surf spot into a nightmare? That chaos was just the start. I've been reporting on South African coastal incidents for more than 10 years, following where sport, law, and the environment collide. Source: Reuters, South Africa surfing tragedy, 295 deaths 2023, August 14, 2023. The KwaZulu-Natal incident left 295 surfers hurt, sparking a nationwide inquiry. Source: Reuters. Authorities acted fast, arresting several organizers once safety violation allegations came to light. Source: BBC. Later, the High Court outlined promoter liability, invoking South African tort law. Source: SAFLI. Meanwhile, the Department of Environmental Affairs triggered its mass surf accident response plan, as detailed in the 2021-2022 annual report. Source: Government report. The International Surfing Association cited the tragedy as a catalyst for fresh safety rules in its 2023 audit. Source: ISA report. That single wave's reverberations have spread far beyond the shoreline, sparking legal fights, policy overhauls, and a lingering question. Who really green lights a wave that turns into hell on the shore? When rescue crews hauled the final survivor from the water, the sun sank low, casting long shadows across a forever changed beach. The organizers' shouted confession hung in the salty air, starkly reminding us that the line between sport and disaster can be as thin as a surfboard's edge. What started as a swell now unfolds into courtroom drama, an environmental reckoning, and a community forced to face the price of a sport they adore. Stick with us while we untangle the decisions that led to this disaster, the legal fallout that followed, and the lasting impact on South Africa's surf culture. The disaster that ripped across the KwaZulu-Natal shoreline left 295 surfers hurt, a scar that still throbs nationwide. Its sheer magnitude sparked a nationwide inquiry, yet that probe soon morphed into a forensic teardown of every overlooked protocol. In a dimly lit community hall, a local activist rose to speak, her voice steady even though grief still hung in the room. She told the crowd that safety permits for the event had been filed months ahead, only to be tossed aside by the organizing committee. "The paperwork sat on a shelf while the boats rolled out," she said, gesturing at a pile of empty folders that should have contained the permits. She went on to note that illegal dumping oil, plastic, and rusted equipment had been occurring just offshore, fouling the very break that drew the surfers. Source: Reuters. The activist's testimony was not a lone echo. Footage lifted from the charter company's own archives exposed maintenance logs riddled with overdue hull inspections. Those logs showed the vessel slated to ferry participants had missed its required survey by over 6 months, a breach that should have kept the boat docked under maritime law. The same records flagged recurring rust patches along the hull, a clear sign of structural fatigue. An oceanographer called to testify before the commission explained that the swell was forecast at 2.5 meters on the day of the event, with a rapid rise in wave period that would challenge even seasoned riders. "The forecast was public and the warning was clear," the expert insisted, his tone mixing frustration with sorrow. He argued the organizers' choice to go ahead ignored a basic risk assessment, essentially swapping safety for spectacle. Source: BBC. While the onshore chaos unfolded panic, rescue boats, frantic calls for help, the offshore reality was a cascade of ignored safety measures. The High Court judgment later outlined the promoter's liability under South African tort law, stating that the duty of care owed to participants had been breached in multiple, measurable ways. The ruling cited the lack of proper vessel certification, the absence of emergency response drills, and the failure to enforce crowd control protocols as direct contributors to the injuries. Source: SAFLII. The Department of Environmental Affairs, in its 2021-2022 annual report, had already laid out a response plan for mass surf accidents. Section 4.2 of that report stressed rapid containment of hazardous material, coordinated medical triage, and immediate ecological assessment. Yet on the day of the incident, none of that plan was set in motion. The department's own papers revealed that the emergency liaison officer's radio frequency had been switched off, a procedural slip that delayed the arrival of specialized rescue units by more than 30 minutes. Source: Government report. Satellite imagery captured in the weeks that followed painted a stark picture of lingering environmental damage. Swaths of oil slicks stretched across the coastline, shimmering under the sun like a thin veil of death. Debris, broken surfboards, tangled fishing nets, and fragments of the charter boat's hull dotting the shoreline testified to a disaster that was as ecological as it was human. The International Surfing Association's 2023 safety audit, compiled after the incident, listed the 295 surfer event as a catalyst for sweeping regulatory reforms. The audit highlighted 3 systemic failures: inadequate vessel certification, insufficient weather risk analysis, and a lack of transparent permitting processes. It called for an international standard that would require real-time monitoring of swell forecasts and mandatory third-party safety audits for any mass surf gathering. Source: ISA. The investigative thread that weaves through activist testimony, maintenance logs, expert analysis, court rulings, and satellite data forms a single, undeniable narrative. Corporate negligence was the engine that powered this catastrophe. The organizers' green light was not a blessing but a reckless endorsement of a broken system, one that allowed unsafe vessels, ignored clear weather warnings, and turned a celebrated sport into a lethal gamble. In the aftermath, families of the injured have filed civil claims, invoking the very tort principles outlined by the High Court. Their lawyers argue that the promoter's breach of duty directly caused the physical and emotional trauma endured by the surfers. The legal filings reference the same maintenance logs and permitting failures highlighted by the activist, reinforcing the link between documented negligence and the human toll. The environmental scar, however, lingers longer than any courtroom decision. Coastal ecosystems, already stressed by climate change, now grapple with oil-induced hypoxia that threatens kelp forests and the fish that rely on them. Local fishermen report a noticeable drop in catch volumes, attributing the decline to the lingering slicks that smothered breeding grounds. These ecological repercussions echo the broader warning embedded in the ISA's audit. Without systemic safety reforms, the ocean itself becomes a casualty. The final report of the National Inquiry, released months later, concluded that the organizers' decision to proceed was grossly negligent and inconsistent with accepted standards of maritime and event safety. It recommended criminal prosecution for the arrested organizers, civil liability for the charter company, and immediate implementation of the department's response plan. Source: BBC. Yet the story does not end with legal pronouncements. It continues on the beaches where the waves still break, where activists now monitor every vessel that departs for the surf. They carry copies of the High Court judgment, the ISA audit, and the satellite images, visual proof that keeps the memory of the disaster alive and demands accountability. In the balance of this investigation lies a stark lesson. When the green light is granted without rigorous safety checks, the cost is measured not only in bruised bodies but in polluted seas, broken trust, and a legacy of preventable loss. The evidence is clear, the responsibility is documented, and the call for change rings louder than any surfboard slicing the water. The next chapters of this documentary will trace how these revelations have reshaped policy, sparked grassroots activism, and forced the global surfing community to confront its own vulnerabilities. The story of the 295 surfer disaster is a warning, and its evidence etched in logs, testimonies, court rulings, and satellite pixels must not be ignored. Courtroom got so quiet you could have heard a wax drip from a surfboard. The judge lifted that gavel like it weighed a ton, her eyes sweeping across a gallery packed tighter than a beach parking lot on a holiday weekend. She dropped the hammer with a ruling that's gonna ripple through every surf spot in KwaZulu-Natal and beyond. The charter company and the event promoter were slammed with gross negligence for the disaster that unfolded on that coastline, and the judge didn't mince words about it. Source: she didn't beat around the bush. This wasn't some minor slip-up. The judge laid out the 295 injuries from the national inquiry like a warning flare, calling it the clearest illustration of systemic failure you could imagine. Then she hit M with South African tort law like a left hook, tying the promoters to restitution so tight they'd feel it in their sponsor contracts. Her words cut straight to the chase. You gave the green light to a race without proper safety nets, and now you'll answer for the wreckage you left behind. By the time the court session ended, a dumpster fire of internal emails hit the internet like a sneaker wave. One message from the organizer basically begged the charter guys to just pull the trigger on the start, even though a storm was clearly coming, swearing that the crowd won't accept a delay. Another email practically shrugged off safety board concerns because, hey, we can't afford to look flaky. The dam broke, and suddenly everyone could see the profit motive swimming right up to the surface. Source: outside the courthouse, activists who'd been camped out for weeks like it was a protest festival erupted like a set of barrels breaking. Some cheered, some wailed, but all of them held up signs screaming for cash to help the victims and a complete overhaul of how coastal events get licensed. One protest leader put it plain: this isn't just about money, it's about every surfer who ever trusted the ocean and got burned. The tide had turned and the crowd knew it. Source: the judge dropped a $12 million restitution fund like it was a heavy set everyone had been waiting for. The cash was carved up for medical bills, rehab, and fixing up the shoreline that got hammered during the chaos. Sure, it's a chunk of change, but the judge called it the bare minimum, given the scale of the disaster. She also tossed in an independent oversight crew to keep the funds from disappearing into the same black hole that swallowed prior disaster payouts. Hidden in the legalese was a jab at the Department of Environmental Affairs, so-called Coordinated Rescue Plan for Surf Disasters. The judge roasted it as a total joke, calling it a paper tiger that got tossed in the trash when the waves got real. Source: fast forward a few weeks, and the International Surfing Association dropped a safety audit that read like a post-mortem. They used the 295 tragedy as the spark to light a new regulatory wildfire: tighter event licenses, mandatory real-time weather tracking, and independent safety checks for any offshore race. The ocean was getting a rulebook upgrade, and it was long overdue. Source: the courtroom, the leaked emails, and the protest chants all crashed together like a set of wipeouts, leaving one brutal truth in their wake. When the people in charge ignore the red flags, a sport turns into a body count. This ruling wasn't just about slapping wrists. It was society staring into the abyss and deciding it was time to build a better lifeguard tower. As that gavel banged for the last time, the sound hung in the air like the last swell of the day, a reminder that justice, even when it's late, can still rewrite the rules of the game. 295 surfers, one catastrophic day. The KwaZulu-Natal shoreline still carries the marks of that August storm. But the real harm isn't limited to the seafloor, it's baked into the rules that allowed it. That day wasn't a random mishap. It was a clear failure to act. A stark reminder that South Africa's coastal safety had been treated like an afterthought for far too long. These ripples are now spreading wider. The High Court has already set the legal foundation, holding event organizers to account under South African tort law. Yet holding people liable won't, on its own, prevent the next disaster. What we truly need is a fresh standard, one that puts safety ahead of profit. The Department of Environmental Affairs 2022 report sketches a coastal response plan, but plans alone don't rescue lives. Enforced rules do. Across the continent, surf communities are raising their voices. From Durban up to Cape Town, leaders are urging a unified code of conduct for gatherings like this. Sustainability has moved beyond just the environment. It's now about the folks riding the waves. The ISA's 2023 safety audit backs up what survivors already know. Weak oversight turns excitement into catastrophe. This is the moment to rewrite those rules. The waves won't wait. Neither should we. This is bigger than one event. It's about protecting the future of surfing in Africa. Support doesn't have to be grand. Subscribe, share, donate to the South African Surf Justice Initiative, because the next lineup shouldn't be a gamble. Source: Reuters 2023, BBC 2023, SAFLII 2022, Department of Environmental Affairs 2021-2022, ISA 2023.